I think there is, thank God, there has been a sea change in the world since I first became aware that my sexual identity was not conforming to what the world seemed to think it was supposed to. And I can remember my best friend huddled in the corner of my bedroom, desperately trying to say that he was gay. And knowing it didn't matter, and yet the act of coming out is intense. Let me just say that. It's intense. And we do live in a different world right now, and I'm grateful for that. In my lifetime, we have gone from complete and total oppression and criminalization to gay marriage. And yet, So Cindy, in her incredible Juneteenth talk, if you have not seen it, you need to watch it. It's on our YouTube channel. She talks about freedom. And she talks about freedom using this definition. I totally stole this from you. The power or right to act, speak, or think as one can without hindrance or restraint. How many people in here have actually ever felt truly free? I want you to be really honest that you have never felt constrained, that you have never felt hindered. This concept of freedom is alive for all of us, and yet it is particularly alive for those of us who run into those constraints and those hindrances moment after moment after moment. And some of them are external, a lot of them are external, and some of them are also internal. They're an internal understanding of self. So Cindy talked about there being freedom from restraint, there being freedom to something, to opportunity, and the freedom to just be, which is around our personal identity. And when I think about the gay pride movement and what that symbolizes, what I see is a commitment to all three of these areas of freedom. A commitment to be free from restraint, a commitment to have opportunity, like the right to administrative privilege that marriage gives everybody else, and the freedom to just be. And that one in particular has been an incredibly powerful, that sense of authenticity is something that is a clarion call within the LGBT community. And yet, with all the strides that we have made, in my lifetime, look at what has happened in terms of legislation. And 2023, that just goes to March. That's just till March. 385 pieces of anti-LGBTQ legislation in 3 months. There's a war going on, folks. There is something happening. And I was looking at a sign, it's all geared around trans. It's just, the whole thing is just very, very, very challenging if you have been part of this movement for any period of time. I saw a sign as I was looking at images for my talk, and it said, "It's about bathrooms the way it used to be about water fountains." Right? Because it's not really about bathrooms in the same way it was never about water fountains. It's about otherness. It's about not being willing to grow and to expand. And so why all of a sudden is this onslaught happening? And you just have to look at the demographics. So this is 2022. Look at the difference from 2014 to 2022. And you'll notice it's not just Gen Z that is 1 in 5 Gen Z identify as part of LGBTQ, by the way. 1 in 5. But you also see that every other bar has grown as well, in every arena, and it's because there is this sea change happening, and when people feel threatened, they want to try to shut it down. And as Cindy has shared over and over and over again through the Black Civil Rights Movement and slavery, that the way that the privileged system does this is through legislation. That is how it becomes systemic. You put something into a bill, and it takes decades to undo something that has become a bill or a law. Now, most of us may be aware that the Pride movement, the pivotal moment, I would call it the Tinder spark that sort of set off how we understand modern gay pride, happened at Stonewall. And this was at New York City. It was a bar that was for gay LGBTQ, not that we identified it that way then. Language has changed a lot since 1969, right? And in that space, the police came in and they tried to arrest everyone, and it devolved into, for the first time, a black lesbian threw the first punch and said, enough, right? And that spread, and there were days of unrest in the village after the Stonewalls, we call them the Stonewall riots. But it didn't just start there. It started here. It started even before here. But we're going to start with Bayard Rustin, because the gay rights movement would not exist without this man. The Black Civil Rights Movement wouldn't exist without this man either, but the gay rights movement would not exist without this man. So he was what you would call at the time, out gay man, which meant only the people closest to him knew. He was a close confidant of Martin Luther King, and he was continually caught in this dynamic tension between him being gay and being unapologetic about his sexual orientation, and the tension that was creating within the Black community. And there were Black ministers who threatened to tell the world that Bayard Rustin and Martin Luther King were lovers if Bayard Rustin didn't step back. So he stepped back for a while. But then we get to 1963, and Martin Luther King, a man of such vision, said, I don't care that he is gay. He is the best man for this job. And Bayard Rustin organized that 1963 March on Washington, where over 200,000 people descended on Washington. And some of the people that descended along Washington with him were part of, well, I'm going to go forward, the Mattachine Society. There were 9 members of the Mattachine Society who went down to see what Bayard Rustin was doing. And this is where the seeds start to get planted. So gay rights, the idea of gay rights existing in wholeness, existed before the 60s. We had in the 50s, it was really the Sisters of Bilitis and the Mattachine. And there were other organizations as well, but those two were really sort of pivotal. And they had chapters all over the United States, and they were very committed to working within the status quo. So they were working to try to shift medical doctors' opinions. They were working within the system. By the time we get to the 60s, there's a real frustration with working within the system. So we start to see marches start to happen, and this is Ernestine Eckstein. The Black Civil Rights Movement created the environment and the lessons for the LGBTQ movement to grow, as well as for the women's movement. All of it grew out of the bravery, courage, vision, and insight of the Black Civil Rights Movement. And so in 1965, you start to see demonstrations happening in Washington. I love this. They did a sip-in instead of a sit-in. It's very gay, right? So in New York City, in New York State at the time, if you were gay, you could not be served in a bar. You were not allowed to be served alcohol if you were gay in a bar. So the Mattachine Society went into Julius's bar in 1966. They sat down, they ordered drinks, and then they told the bartender they were gay. And that is the bartender attempting to remove their drinks. This actually ended up changing New York State alcohol license laws so that gays could actually order a drink in a bar. This is the kind of oppression that when you think about it, it's like you can't even go into a bar and order a drink. Then we have the women's movement. Betty Friedman famously said in 1969, warning the women's community about the Lavender Menace, that the Lavender Menace was going to undermine the women's movement. And you also have to understand at that time we had the Red Menace. So there was this big equation going on with communism and just how dangerous that was. So what the women did, and this is so classically what the LGBTQ community has done again and again and again. Betty Friedman says, you are the Lavender Menace. And so what do these women do? They take over the 1970 Now Women's Congressional meeting. The meeting starts, they unplug the microphone, they turn the lights off. They start rebel yelling through the thing, and then they turn the lights back on, and there are women standing all around wearing purple shirts that say Lavender Menace. And then other women start standing up and ripping their shirts off, and of course people are like, oh, and then underneath it says Lavender Menace. They took over that meeting for 2 hours, and you can see how much fun they're having. This is actual footage from the meeting, where in 2 hours, they changed the understanding of the women so that by 1970, lesbian rights were incorporated into the charter for now, right? So, and then it was the Lavender Menace, along with 2 other men, who a year after the Stonewall riots decided they wanted to do a commemorative march. It was a protest march. Let me be really clear that Gay Pride did not start off as a happy parade. It was a protest march, and it started downtown, and it started with a couple of thousand people, and by the time they got to Central Park for the first Gay In, they had tens of thousands of people. And when you look at the photos from that, all you see is joy. So much joy. Because for the first time, really, for the first time in our modern, this is a picture, so it was called the Christopher Street Gay Liberation Day. And this is a picture of it. For the first time, you had a community that no longer said they were going to be ashamed. Shame was no longer going to be in charge. Instead of hiding, instead of being silent, they were going to speak up. And I really want you to think about how brave they had to be. I want you to think about how much courage that required. They could have been brought up on criminal charges. There are still states in this country where if you're gay, you can lose your job, or your housing, or your medical insurance. What's happening in Florida right now is a travesty. People are losing their medical insurance because you stand for who you are and the courage it takes to do that. And I want to be clear, you don't just do it once. I know that I come across as being very confident and I am very out. But every time I stand up and speak about being a queer woman, there is a part of me that has to dig in. There's a part of me that has to say, I don't know what's going to come at me. I don't know how this is going to be met. I don't know what I'm going to be on the receiving end. Every time I do that, I have to stand in that courage again and again and again and again. I got to tell you, it's a little exhausting. Little things. When Chris and I took this cruise, most of you don't have to think about where you're going. You don't have to take into consideration whether or not it's even legal for you to be a couple as you step off a boat onto that land. Most of you don't have to think about what it means to just hold hands with your life partner in a foreign country. There are places that my wife and I will never go to. Flat out, we will never go to. And that's because we don't feel safe. And what's fascinating is that when we were on that ship, over 6,000 people, over 2,500, no wonder we got COVID, right? 2,500 staff. I can't tell you, and the staff was from all over, they were amazing. I can't tell you the number of people from the staff that gravitated to Chris and I and came out to me because they weren't safe anywhere else. And here was this couple that clearly is comfortable in their skin, but still having to dig deep every time. And they felt that. They felt that. And that's important to me, that I stand as a role model. But I got to tell you, it does ask something again and again and again. Silence equals death became something in our community that just means the deepest thing possible. Because AIDS came, and there was no longer any excuse for our silence, because death was the alternative. And when you're up against something that black and white, it forces you to step out. And what I want to invite each of you into is, you don't need to be up against the wall like that in order to speak out. That you have the advantage, if you're an ally, you have the advantage of privilege. You have the advantage of speaking in a way that I can't, that Cindy can't. Because no matter what we say, we're going to be seen as being self-serving or defensive. We need allies who are speaking for us. There's a woman who runs a Presbyterian church in Oakland, and I met her like a decade ago, and this was before gay marriage was legal. And she looked at me and said, I have not married a couple since No on 8 passed. My entire community, straight community primarily, has not been married. No one in the community has gotten married. Because as a community, we have said we will not marry until gay couples can marry as well. That is allyship. I remember when she told me, I was like, whoa. I mean, that was shocking to me. Because I didn't think anybody would care enough. And isn't that sad? That I didn't even think anybody would care enough? When Doma finally fell, they did this mass wedding. They had like 7 members of their community who had been waiting, and they all did this mass wedding ceremony for everybody. That's what it means to not be silent. That's what it means. And I understand, because I have navigated the shame that we hear. You know, I was here in 1987 at the second Washington March. 500,000 people showed up, which, think about that, no Twitter, no social media, 500,000 people. Anybody who lived in DC who was queer was just opening up their house to let people, there were just people sleeping on the floor of people's homes so that people could come and attend this march. And this march was profound because it wasn't, the gay community has never just been focused on itself, sort of. Some parts of the community have been focused on itself. But a lot of the community understands that it's all interconnected, that everybody's rights are all interconnected. And so it's come out for yourself, come out for your friends, and most importantly, come out for justice. Gay or not, it's time to speak out. Gay or not, it's time to speak out. And I want to be really clear why it's so important in our spiritual community that we do our work to clear our own shame and issues around this stuff. Because this is what we get met with. As I walked through that march in DC, this is what I was met with. That is what I was met with. That is what I was met with. I have been cursed. I have been told that God hates me. I have been called an abomination. I have had to stand as people tell me that the very essence of my being is hateful. There is something about that requires that we dig deep. That we don't, how do you not take that in? How do you, as allies, not contribute silently to this? Because I will tell you that there is so much spiritual malpractice in the gay community. So much spiritual malpractice that when we show up in a spiritual community, we are showing up deeply wounded. We are showing up bleeding from the kind of garbage that has been thrown at us. Even if it wasn't in our immediate vicinity, I had nobody in my immediate vicinity ever do this to me. But I have had people do this to me. It still lands. It still sticks somehow. James Baldwin, who stands on that intersection of gay and black, so with so much eloquence, says we can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. There are so many ways that LGBTQ voices are silenced. There are so many ways that are subtle and insidious. What I would love is for everybody in this community that if they hear something like, we're a gay church, says, yeah, isn't it great? Isn't that fun? Isn't that amazing? And I understand that has something, because there's so much of our culture that is built into saying that there is something shameful, there's something wrong, essentially wrong. That's where shame comes from the idea that at the very essence of my being, something's wrong with me. And we in Unity know that is not true. But we need the allies to speak. I have a minister, she's straight, at Unity of Vacaville, and they have a trans family in their community, and somebody said they had a whole meeting and they needed some support, and people were showing up, and she was so impressed. And then one member of the community said, I hope we're not becoming that church. And her response was, we already are that church. Are we that church? I hope so. I really hope so, because I'm here, and I don't plan on going anywhere. So let's take a look at the Progress Pride flag. I've had a lot of people ask me about it. So the colors that are here are red for life. It sounds a lot like our 12 powers, doesn't it? Red for life, orange for healing, yellow for new ideas. The original yellow was sunshine, which I love. Green, prosperity. The original green was nature, right? Blue for serenity, violet for spirit, black, brown for people of color, white, blue, and pink for trans, and yellow, purple circle for intersex. So that's the symbolism behind the Progress Pride flag. And the violet has always been there. The Pride flag has gone through many iterations. It continues to evolve. It's one thing I love about this community is it's always expanding, more inclusive, not less. But spirit has always been there. The awareness that the spiritual principles that we teach have value for everyone. For everyone. And I got to tell you, there is so much pain in the LGBTQ community. We are a healing teaching. This community, when I found this teaching, it was healing. It was so powerfully healing for me to hear that I wasn't just accepted, I was celebrated. that my queerness wasn't seen as some sort of disadvantage, not something I needed to hide, not something I needed to not talk about, that my relationship with my wife was something that I can share the way everybody else shares. All of that is just because it makes me feel seen. And isn't that what we all want? To be seen. So shame resilience. I'm going to share with you how you build up your shame resilience, because we've all experienced shame, yes? We all carry those places inside where we think that something is inherently not right about who we are. So we need to recognize the vulnerability. We need to recognize external factors. And we need to connect with others, and we need to discuss our feelings. And when I looked at that and I thought about the Lavender Menace taking over the Now conference, it's exactly what they did. Betty Friedman tried to call them the Lavender Menace and to make it something negative. And that community recognized the vulnerability and owned it. Owned it, unapologetically owned it. And then they recognized that there were all these external factors going on. And instead of ignoring them, they connected with each other and with the larger community. And they shared and discussed feelings. That meeting went on for 2 hours. It was basically Lesbian 101. That is how we move past shame. Because can you see how that becomes, there's nothing to be ashamed of. So whatever it is that you're carrying in your own heart, there is a place, a space for you to share that and to know that you are whole. Connectivity, authenticity, inclusivity. These are our core values. And they ask us to not be silent. They ask us to be brave. They ask you, if you're an ally, to be half as brave as the LGBTQ youth needs to be on a daily basis. A quarter as brave. An eighth as brave. Can you be just braver than you are right now? Because the truth is, you are the light of the world, and I am the light of the world, and it is our job to go out and see the light of the world that we all are, and to not be silent about it. When you hear somebody make a homophobic statement, you need to gently and lovingly call them on it. When you hear somebody living in the shame of something, you get to ask them, can we talk about that? Nobody's wrong. This is our world is trying to grow. There's no wrong here. But you have to invite people into the exploration of why does that make you uncomfortable? What is it really that's happening for you there? Because I got to tell you, the truth is, whatever bathroom I choose to use, does it really impact your life? I mean, really? Does it impact your life? I had somebody say, on TikTok, somebody was saying, I don't know how to explain to my child that there will be one gender going in and then another gender going in right afterwards. And the person's reply was, you mean like at home? So what we stand for is individual authenticity and global solidarity. Because the freedom for all of us, none of us are free if we're not all free. That's just the truth. What we know, what we understand, is that there is only one life. So if there are those who are oppressed, who are living under bondage, then we too have that within us. And it is our calling to show up in the world and to make a difference. We are all being invited to step out of that little comfort bubble that we love so much. And this area is amazing in terms of its progressiveness, but is there room for growth? Yeah. Oh, yeah, there certainly is. So, This is our affirmation for today. Can you know this with me? I joyfully live as my most authentic self. I am a beacon of light in the world. Let's stand up and say it one more time, and the choir can come on up while we're doing that. Let's say it one more time, nice and loud. I joyfully live as my most authentic self. I am a beacon of light in the world.